So hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this second webinar in our series of webinars on the science of reading. I'm Yevgen Borodin, the CEO of Capti, and I'll be your host and facilitator today. The goal of this webinar series is to help you gain critical insight on the key components of the science of reading framework and how to use them to inform reading instruction. 3 weeks ago, Margaret and Sean were expanding on your view of the science of reading beyond phonics by reviewing the key components in that framework. And today we'll do a deeper dive into using the science of reading to develop specifically vocabulary and morphological awareness. We hope this webinar will give you ideas on how to transform your instructional approaches to teaching vocabulary and morphology to make sure they're based on the science of reading. Today's webinar is sponsored by Capti, which helps assess, accommodate, and advance reading. I would like to introduce our speakers today, Dr. Margaret Opatz, who is a reading research scientist here at Capti, but she's been an elementary, middle school teacher, reading interventionist, and has a PhD from University of Utah. And Sean Morrisey is a 5th grade teacher at Frontier Central School District here in New York. And he's been an ELA standards leader for his school and knows a lot about the science of reading and today's topic. All right. Without any further ado, Margaret, take it away.
All right. Thank you. All right. So as Yevgen mentioned, today we will be focusing on 2 aspects of the science of reading. And these are really at the word level. But when we think about vocabulary and morphology, context matters so much. So while we're focusing on that word level, we're really expanding it to be able to understand words to make meaning of text. So we'll take a look at both of those aspects of the science of reading, and then we'll look at how you can objectively measure vocabulary and morphology growth over time. And we will provide a little bit of time at the end for any questions that you may have. So I mentioned it previously, but we are really focused on the science of reading and looking at Scarborough's reading rope. Today, we're really focused on vocabulary, but we've also included morphology within this webinar because morphology is so important for being able to know the parts of words and then make sense of the meaning of text. So as we begin, I think it's important to refresh your memory or introduce you to the concept of vocabulary through the framework of Beck, McCohen, and Kuchen's 3 tiers of vocabulary. So we have tier 1 words, and these are basic words that are commonly used across the day for students, just in their conversations. These are words that we typically do not have to teach unless you're working with students who are new to English. Then we have tier 2 words, and these include those robust high frequency words that are used across multiple disciplines or content areas. And these are challenging because they often have multiple meanings, and they are specifically words that really need to be taught and taught across the disciplines so that students know how to use them in multiple contexts. And then we also have tier 3 words. And these are words that are not very frequent, and they are typically just in one content area. So let's take a quick look at tier 1. So I mentioned that these are those basic words common across everyday language conversation. So they're words like sad, elephant, walk, baby. Most of these words students would know without having to be taught them. Then when we look at tier 2 words, these ones are more abstract and do need instruction to be able to make sense of the words, especially across disciplines. So if you think about analyze, you can use that word across all disciplines, but when you analyze a literary text, it's a lot different than the way that you're going to analyze a historical text, and students have to know how to do that differently. Here are some other words that are common tier 2 words, and these are academic language that for sure need to be taught. And then we have tier 3. We don't typically see tier 3 words across disciplinary areas because they're like pterodactyl and they have very specific meanings. Isosceles, aorta, igneous, algorithm, magma, and protagonist. So these have very specific meanings in their content areas. So while we have that framework of understanding what vocabulary is, and we need to think about, well, what does that tell us about how to teach vocabulary? So there is a lot of research on this. So vocabulary instruction has to be explicit. Students need multiple exposures. They need spaced exposures. So that means that you're recycling the words across the school year rather than intensely teaching specific words for a short period of time. We know that it's better to have those spaced exposures over time. And then students need to have these words taught to them in multiple contexts. So specifically when we're talking about tier 2 words, in every discipline or content area, those words need to be taught so that students know how to use the words in various contexts. And then I think the most important thing that research tells us is that students need a supportive learning environment. They need to have one where their affective filter is lowered so that they can test out new words that they may not have a full grasp on, and then get feedback on those words. We encourage students to play with language, and Sean is going to go through some of the ways that he has really created this supportive learning environment for teaching vocabulary. So Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you, and welcome. Yeah.
Jeez, I'm a rookie here. Sorry. So hello, everyone from around the globe. I see people all around our country, New Zealand, in different areas. So welcome. So I'm currently a 5th grade teacher. And I think a lot of the things that I implement in my classroom, kind of following the research, can be implemented in middle, high school, and even in lower grades as well. One of the things when we talk about academic vocabulary, it's vocabulary that I don't think schools really focus on as primarily oh, we really need to teach these words. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of things out there when we talk about curriculums. There is one from Margaret McCowan and her colleagues called the RAVE program. They never marketed it, so I contacted her previously because they used it in research, and she was nice enough to send me what they use in research. So it's one of the things that I use in my classroom. So when we talk about teaching academic vocabulary words, first it's what words we're going to teach. So Coxete's academic word list is one nice place to start. So it's about the top 500 words that occur throughout middle, high school textbooks. Words like function, integral, vital, words such as those. So with the RAVE program, it's one way that I teach these words, and it's a kind of a very explicit program. We talk about multiple exposures to the words. So you'll see over the first 3 days with a unit, I introduced 9 words, 3 per day. And then following that, we kind of play with these words for 4 more days so that kids can see words in different contexts. It makes them think about multiple meanings of the word. So by the end of a week and a half or 2 weeks, the students really have the words pretty well embedded at the start, kind of in their long-term memory. So I'm going to the next slide, please. So this is from their program. So kids really need to have words see it in different kind of contexts, and definitely student-friendly definitions. Typically, we don't want to have definitions that are too wordy. We really want to narrow it down so it's friendly to the student, so they could kind of an anchor point, they could kind of easily learn the word. As you see on the slide, if something is integral to something else, it is a necessary part of it. And I'll just let you guys take about 20 seconds to read those contexts. So as you see the word integral, this is kind of our initial exposure to the words with students. we just discuss the two different contexts, and we discuss just the student-friendly definition, you know, kind of for the first couple of minutes. As we move on, so in the RAVE program, I just want to give like one example of a way that the RAVE program plays with these words. So this is kind of neat. So we're talking about like song titles. So like number one, it says like, ooh, you're a major part of this team. I'll tell you now and I'll tell you again, this team couldn't go on without you. So, ooh, you're a major part of this team. Basically, you're crucial to this team. And then we can go through kind of like 9 song titles, and kids kind of figure it out. Ooh, it's really, really important. Ooh, you're integral players. So that would be like the answer for that one. So it's an exposure to the word it's kind of fun to students. It's somewhat different. If we go down to like number 4, if we all come together as one. So then we're thinking about, oh, what word is like, oh, we're all one. So we can kind of see the song title, We Can Unify. And with that, I would probably pull out the prefix as well, which we'll talk about morphology. Uni being one, we're all in it together as one. Okay, so that's just one way that I teach using the RAVE program. So another way, so AI like ChatGPT, many of you probably, it's kind of out there, have maybe played around with it. One way for teachers, one reason I love ChatGPT is I can create fluency passages for my students, and I can just ask it to embed like the words consent, ambiguous, and outcome in a short paragraph or in a 100-word essay. So it's providing more exposures to those vocabulary words we're working on. So the hard thing when teaching about academic vocab is, well, kids need to see, you know, these words in writing in context, but, you know, you can't be sure like what's going to come up in a textbook or that. While creating your own passages, and I like to do fluency work, so students will partner up and we'll alternate reading like paragraphs, you know, throughout the passages. This is a shorter one, but as you can see, those 3 words are embedded right in there. So it brings up another multiple exposure to the words. So as we go on with this webinar, you'll see is providing many exposures to these words is really, really important, because depending on the student, some students may only need 3 or 4 exposures. Some students may need 15 different exposures for that word really to be embedded in their memory, where they can use in language, they can understand it with reading, and actually using it in their writing. So that's just one way that you can you know, play with the words. So one of the curriculums that I use in my classroom, I use novel units from it's a Reading Reconsidered curriculum. So this novel that I use in 5th grade, it's Bud Not Buddy. It's an amazing book. A couple of the questions in one of the units is, how did the Great Migration change race relations, and why? So it's a very good question, but thinking about vocabulary, do all students know the word migrate or migration very, very well? And chances are, especially at the elementary, they may not. So it's at this point, ooh, I think, well, I really need to teach the word migrate or migration. So here's a couple examples on how I do that. So thinking about the word migrate, when we think about initially explicitly teaching students these words, I kind of keep these things in mind. Seeing the word in a couple of different contexts, a couple of different sentences or paragraphs, taking a picture, like showing a picture that goes along with the word is a good idea. Student-friendly definition is a very good idea. Related words, like not just like exact synonyms, because most words don't have exact synonyms. There's a little bit of nuance for words. So related words that have similar meanings is good to expose the kids to. And which we'll get into in a little bit, I love talking about the roots or the prefixes or the suffixes in words. So as you can see right here, we start off with migrate, which is a verb. The root, M-I-G-R, means to move. So then as we move on, we're going to be talking about more words that have that root in it. And anytime we see M-I-G-R, good chance has to do with some type of movement. So when we think about a context, if people migrate, they move from one place to the other, especially in order to find work or live somewhere for a short time. So that's one context. People migrate to cities in order to find work. Just giving them another example with a related pictures of birds on migration. So another thing that I like to do is get kids answering questions, thinking about the words migrate or migrant, variations of the words in different type of contexts. So the more we get kids thinking, the more that anything that we teach is going to get into their long-term memory. So here's just some examples. What do you think migrant workers do? What is one job that makes you migrate throughout the year? So the kids are writing to respond with this. We could do like a pair share. So maybe I have kids write to these 3 prompts. Then they share their answers with someone sitting next to them. Then maybe they rewrite if they didn't have something real, like maybe they didn't understand one, they rewrite because their partners kind of told them, ooh, this is a good answer. And then we'll share out as a class. So like, where do birds that live in Buffalo during the summer migrate when it is winter? And the second one I really like, would migrant workers usually live somewhere permanently or temporarily? I'm linking it to other words that we've previously learned, the word permanent or temporarily. So then not only are we learning our new word migrant, but we're kind of reviewing and having kids think about previous learned words of permanent and temporary as well. If people are familiar with the Writing Revolution book, they do a lot of work with conjunctions. It's a great book. So if you haven't read that one, it's a must read. The Writing Revolution. So because, but, so sentence stems are great. So now it's more having kids think more about, ooh, the Great Migration transformed America because, like, why did it happen? The Great Migration transformed America, but, ooh, like there might be, it's like a U-turn. Ooh, what other things happened as like a result of the Great Migration? Then we have the Great Migration transformed America. So, and they're responding to like, what effect did it have? So because, but, so sentence stems are great. This is just one little picture from my classroom. As a teacher, so I like to put up all the words on a huge word wall. So I'm not big in my classroom of like posting lots of things in the classroom, but I do love to post the words. So there's currently probably like about 600 words that are posted in class, just so when kids are writing, they have a chance to look at the wall. Can they use this type of word, just to kind of give them a scaffold? Because it takes a while for these words to get in memory, especially for writing. If you notice, I like to put roots prefixes with the words. So like if you see unify in the middle there, oh, uni means one. So it's so then the kids are constantly thinking, oh, other words that have uni in them, oh, that might have to do something with one. Or words like convene. Well, if you know word parts with morphology, you can kind of figure out what that word means, because ven means come and the prefix con means together. So when we're convening, a group of people are coming together, generally for a purpose. So there's a little more to it than just the, kind of just the prefix and the root. But putting these words on a wall has been super valuable in my classroom. It really, really helps with their writing, for sure. Another picture that you'll see in the next slide. Oh, Oh, maybe we don't have that in there. So I also have I also put a lot of the prefixes and roots. Oh, maybe I think we'll see that later. Will we see that later, Margaret?
I bet we will see that with morphology.
Okay. So here's the problem with vocabulary. I'll let Margaret take this part of it.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Sean. So Sean did a great job of explaining some of his really highly effective strategies for teaching vocabulary. And I think it's clear that he's not separating vocabulary and morphology. He's really bringing that together, which is perfect because when we think about the problem with vocabulary, we need students to start to build their own vocabularies by knowing those word parts, because English has more than 700,000 words, and the English language just continues to grow. Just last year, there were 700 words added to the dictionary, and that's typical. So we typically have just a ton of new words added each year. So to add to this problem is that there are 15 to 30,000 words that are in our working vocabulary. Some people may have more, some people may have less. But the problem is that memorization alone cannot be the system that we use for teaching words. So we really need to think about what we can do. And one thing that we can do is teach morphology. You might be asking why, and Sean's kind of already answered part of the why, but a big part of it is because English is a morphophonemic language. So that means that the spelling system or the alphabetic orthography in English represents both meaning and sound. So what we can do because of that is teach morphology. So when we teach morphology, we're raising students' morphological awareness or their knowing of those word parts or morphemes. And this doesn't just enhance vocabulary development, but it also helps reading and spelling as well. And Sean just mentioned writing. I would argue beyond what Moats said and add writing into that as well. So morphology is the study of word parts. And Sean, you did a great job already introducing us to that. Those of you who may be new to morphology, I just want to set some groundwork before we get into Sean's examples. But to do that, it's important to know that morphemes are the smallest unit of speech that carry meaning. So when you think about that, some words are morphemes, but not all morphemes are words. And let me show you an example of this. So in the word remake, we have two morphemes. We have re and make. So re is a morpheme that means again, but it's not a word, whereas make is a morpheme and it means to form, and it's also a word. So when students start to know that, they can start to connect that anytime that they're seeing re used as that prefix at the beginning of the word, they're going to know that that means again, and then they can start to make sense of new words and start to build their own vocabulary, because that's really what it's going to take is more knowledge of words leads to more knowledge of words, kind of like that Matthew effect that Stanovich introduced decades ago. So now, Sean, I'm going to have you take it over and show us what you're doing for teaching morphology.
Sorry about that. So this is out of the UK. They have a matrix maker. Lots of teachers are starting to use these. One thing actually going back though, when we think about morphology in like the school setting, I think it's definitely from at least around the area that I work in. I think it's an area that's kind of a weakness in schools. We teachers don't focus on morphological aspects of words like in a very systematic manner. Probably needs more time. So one way to do that is using matrix makers. So there's a great one online where it probably takes you about 15 or 20 minutes to figure out how to use it. It's not very, very long, and you can make your own morphology matrices. And depending on the age of student you have, you can make some that are easier, some that are really in depth. Here is an example, MIGR, migrate means to move. So then you could kind of ask students, okay, so what words can we make here? So students can just have 1 or 2 minutes. They can discuss with a partner on their own. write different words that they can try to figure out, ooh, are these words like migrant, migrate, migration. Oh, then we have immigrate. So it's really tying that root M-I-G-R and linking many different words together. Because as Margaret said, like, you only have so much time in the school day. You have to teach as efficient as possible, and you want the kids to learn as much as they can. You can't just teach words separately throughout the whole school day. There's too many words in the English language. How can you link certain, words together? Well, with roots, you can. Now we have about 8 to 10 words that we could just make right here, and they all have to do with movement, maybe moving from a country to a country or moving within a country. But it's a lot like more efficient use of time. We're discussing this, playing around with the root miger for about 10 minutes. It's pretty powerful for sure. Okay, here's another one that I built using the matrix maker, struct, which means to build. And I'll just ask the kids, okay, come up with as many words as you can. What's nice is then the kids, from kind of their memory for retrieving information is really important. So those kind of memories of how this works get really embedded in long-term memory. Then they have to think, oh, re means again. Oh, the prefix as con as means together. So now we're not just like thinking about the root struct, we're thinking about prefixes, we're thinking about suffixes. Even, for the younger students who are in first grade, oh, ing or adding an s, what does that mean? So it's constantly like really looking at the smaller parts of words and their meanings. So to me, it's a really, really good use of time for sure. Okay, so retrieval practice are 2 words that I think in the UK get brought up a lot, not so much in the US. I think we're starting to get there, but having students retrieve from memory, like kind of always quizzing kids, not necessarily for grades, but like, here is one that I had like a brain dump, and I said, okay, you have 3 minutes, write as many prefixes and roots as you can on your mini whiteboards. So for 3 minutes, the students just wrote away, didn't take a long time. Then we spent about 5 minutes. I try to go really, really quick. We kind of call on students, okay, let's see how many that we could put up on the big whiteboard. So this is my big whiteboard. I just wrote them out as quick as possible. And within a 10-minute kind of a retrieval practice, boy, we covered probably about 80 different prefixes and suffixes and roots going over. And then I probably spent a few more minutes like on the numbers, uni meaning 1, bi meaning 2. So like, it's just another way to provide more exposures, because it can't be a one-off. It can't be like, oh, we're going to learn that ses or said means go, and then you should know it and always remember it. And if you are paying attention, you're going to remember. Well, that's kind of silly. Kids need multiple exposures, for that to be really embedded in memory. So just another way, mini whiteboards are great. So this is the first year I actually put roots prefixes right in my classroom. So if I could go back, I would color code them better. I don't have them colored. There's the color coding is there's no reason for it. It's just that's the cards I had. But I basically have about the top 200 prefixes, roots, suffixes that come up, especially for elementary students. So sort of more of the easier ones, so to speak. So those are on my wall, in part for students, but in part for me too. So if I have 5 minutes, my lesson went fast, I can do a retrieval practice activity where I can just kind of ask kids, okay, so contra, what does that prefix mean? And, kids on their whiteboards would be like, oh, against. What kind of other words, that have contra in it? We could think about like, ooh, contradict. Say against, contradict, say against, or ooh, a contrarian. one who's kind of always against the norm, and things like that. So I like putting that right up as just kind of a word wall for sure. Playing with words is so much fun in the classroom. So we play a review game a few times a week where kids will just, I'll ask kids, pick a topic. So it could be anything. We pick topic could be plants, sports, recess. So kids pick a topic. I give them 90 seconds to either they can write it down on their mini whiteboards, or they can think about it like, ooh, how many different words can you use that you could kind of embed in this topic? So they're writing away on their whiteboard boards. And then when the 90 seconds is up, I get the timer ready, and I call on students really quick. It's fast paced. So we're counting up all the words we're using correct in context within a 6-minute period. So we kind of like have fun. We try to break our score, like beat our score, like, ooh, you know, how many words did we use correctly, you know, in this 6 minutes? And what's really, really cool is then kids will get clever. For example, the word integral I taught at the start of this year. Well, that took a little time to teach, but other words that are similar to integral, you could teach really, really quickly then, like the academic words like vital or crucial, because they're very similar to integral. So then kids will be like, oh, you know, photosynthesis is an integral, crucial, or vital part of, you know, plants, you know, about the plant process. And they kind of like, so the kids are using like those words, trying to like game the system in the game, but it's kind of fun because they're using those words appropriately, and that's what we want. So I'll give you some typical responses here, and these are fifth graders. So for the responses for topics with plants while studying ecosystems, I think they have some responses on the next slide, right? Okay. Oh, we must have, well, maybe that slide that didn't get on, but so like certain things, like they would say, oh, the Venus flytrap, like devoured. Oh, there it is. Okay, so plants are not only crucial, vital, essential, and integral. So that's kind of fun. Used 4 words that are similar, very important, meaning very important. They also manifest, they bring out glucose for everything. So I'll let you take about 30 seconds just to read through some of these, because they're kind of fun. So what's great is when we see academic words, tier 2 words, like the use of the word naive, the Venus flytrap devoured or consumed the naive fly. So that was a fifth, like these are all fifth graders. Fifth graders are able to come up using really complex academic vocabulary because they've had multiple exposures of these words in the past. And like just so much, it's fun. Like my mom is adamant to acquire a plethora amount of new plants, even though we already have like 1,000 of them. So just another way, kind of word consciousness, that you can kind of review these words. Okay. So I would say over the last 5 years, I've really tried to kind of ramp up my teaching of academic vocabulary. And if you notice here, so one of the questions that we wrote to was, what is an ecosystem, and provide examples of specific types. So using a fifth grader, this is one of my fifth graders, the words in bold are all words that we've kind of talked about this year, we've learned, but in such a short amount of time, and this took him probably not even 10 minutes, use these words, which is to me is pretty great. Like, you know, all ecosystems differ, but all have unique features. Like, you really have to know those words well to be able to use them in writing, and he's able to do that. So whenever we write, though, the kids know we're always trying to improve, you know, like the sophistication of our writing. One way to do that is adding more complex vocabulary. But, you know, a desert lacks sufficient quantities of water, but there are different, plants use different techniques to procure water. So the word procure is an interesting word because it's not, obviously, that's not a word that most fifth graders use. It did come up in one of our nonfiction passages. And it was easy for me to teach that word because we've already learned the words acquire. So procure is to acquire something, but it's something that's hard to acquire. So when that word came up in our passage, it was World War II we were talking about. So people in Denmark were having a hard time procuring different foods because they were rationed. So now he's using it, this student is now using it in a different context in science, even though he learned the word procure in social studies. So you can see based on this writing, if you have like a systematic way and you're using a lot of word consciousness in the classroom, it does go over to their writing for sure. So using academic language, so here's one example. Thinking about how to use academic language as a whole school, as a whole district. So this takes conversations. So I like to try to use academic language like throughout the school day, because usually we only see academic language in like nonfiction and social science. We don't usually use academic language kind of in our everyday speech, so to say. So like what you can do like in primary classrooms for the younger kid. Oh, it just rained. Before you go down the side, please inspect it to see if there are water puddles. So you're on the playground using the word inspect with younger kids. Or, oh, what are the benefits of going outside every day for recess? So Benny means well. So just using words with kids, and especially younger kids, they love hearing bigger words. They want to know what they mean. So those are for like K through 2. You can use those examples. As we move on, maybe examples in grades 3 through 5, middle school, like we're out on the playground, please show me your proficiency in jumping rope. Phys ed teachers can use those types of words as well. Can you differentiate? So maybe you just learned that word, trying to use it on the playground. Can you differentiate between the different types of swings? Can you show me the difference? So sometimes when I use academic words in language, I like to sort of define them right after. Like, can you differentiate between those? Ooh, can you show me the difference? Just another exposure to the word differentiate. So these words were vocabulary words for the book Number of the Stars. So Number of the Stars is a book that I teach every year. One time it came up where one of my students asked if we could have more social studies homework over the weekend. And without a cue, one of my students said, "What you just said is appalling." So now we're kind of laughing. Another student chimes in, "Oh, Grace, you should be ashamed of yourself." So we're laughing, we're using more words. So Grace looked at me indignantly, and I said, one of the words we've learned was indignant. Ooh, you are looking indignant. If I were a fifth grader, I would concur. I would agree with the rest of the class. So using those words in language, just not through like your initial lesson, really is really helpful.
Okay, so now I'm going to take you to Capti Assess's website to show you how we can use Capti Assess with Read Basics to measure vocabulary and morphology. So I'm logging into Capti, and I'm going to go to assignments, and I'll create an assignment just to show you how easy that is. So I've gone to a new assignment. I'm going to go to Read Basics. I'll label this as 7th grade. ELA, I'll select the grade level, grade 7. And then I can decide what sub-skills to assess. So I could potentially do all of these subtests and sub-skills, which would be about 76 minutes. Or I can select just the 2 that I'm focusing on during this webinar, which are vocabulary and morphology. If I do that, it's saying it'll take me about 19 minutes with my students to complete the assessment. Vocabulary should take about 9 minutes, and then morphology about 10. For the difficulty level, I'm selecting personalized because after students take the first assessment with Capti Assess, the next time that they take it, it will actually match them to the appropriate difficulty level per subtest. So I select create. I'm not going to create that one today, but now I'm going to go to the reports to really show you what you learn from the reports in Capti. So in reports, I'm going to classes and into my 7th grade English language arts class. So before I click into there, I can see that this is grade 7. There are 26 students, and 100% of my students have completed each of the subtests. When I click on my class, I now see students, their profiles, and the profiles are based on their performance across the 6 subtests. So a student who's at the low profile has performed at the weak level on most of their subtests. Students who are at the medium profile have completed the subtests at that low or high average level. And then high, most of the students have performed at the strong level within each of the subtests. Notable profiles are unique because they have some type of characteristic that ETS has found through the patterns that exist in data. So some of the notable profiles may look like a student who's really low in decoding, but really high in comprehension, and they may be showing signs of dyslexia. So these are notable for some reason, and there's enough of this pattern to exist that ETS was able to find that it's considered a notable profile. So as I scroll down, you'll see there's this assessment status, meaning that it's looking at students and saying whether or not they've taken the assessment, and these are based on the subtests. So here, all students have completed each of the subtests. As I scroll down farther, I see the scale score, and this is based off of each subtest. You'll see that there are 4 categories. So 4 performance levels, that's weak, low average, high average, and strong. And you can see that for each of the subtests. You can also see grade equivalency and RTI tier recommendations. On grade equivalency, red means that students are 2 or more grade levels below. Orange means that they're 1 grade level below, and green means that students are at or above grade level. For the RTI tiers, we can actually customize the RTI tiers away from the defaults. So we have the defaults are set, but you can actually customize those to change them based on your intervention capacity. And that's something that I can work with you on. And I've done that work with other districts as well. And it really just depends on how many students you can serve, and we can customize those for you. So now I'm going to go into students. And as I select students, now I get students here, and then each of their subtests across the rows. And this first column shows us Lexile, which is calculated based on students' performance in sentence processing, reading efficiency, and reading comprehension. So you'll see that they have the Lexile along with the 6 subtests. Across the top, we have score and then grade equivalency. So I can change that. You can see how that changes, and then percentile as well. I'm going to click back on score. One thing that's nice is each of the columns can be sorted. So here I could look and see how to group students based on vocabulary and the intervention that they may require within the class. I can do this for each of the subtests. As I click into a student, I'm going to sort the students by their names again. As I click into a student, I'm going to click on Read a Klein. And this is what the student summative report looks like. So you start off with this performance overview. You'll get this report that says that Rita's overall performance is medium. So that means that she's likely at those low or high average scores across her subtests. then you'll actually see her data. You can do it in a bar chart or a line chart. You can do score or percentile. And then you actually have the chart of all of her results from the most recent administration. So you have her scale score, percentiles, and grade equivalencies, and then the amount of time that it took her to complete each test, along with the date that she completed it. You also see the Lexile. So we have the last 3 Lexiles here. And you can see that she's at 1,065. It gives you a range and a little bit more information. There's more detailed information for each of the subtests. So each of the foundational reading skills receives a little bit more information. So you're going to see how students are doing, what they can do, and then what they'll benefit from. And this is true for each of the subtests. So we have vocabulary, morphology. As I showed you above, there's a bar chart. You can do the line chart as well. You can do scores or percentiles. And then you can also change the time period that you're looking at. So this goes through each of the subtests. So there's sentence processing, reading efficiency, and reading comprehension. Then we also have report history. And this just shows the students' scores from the administrations of Read Basics that they've completed. So the student completed one in the fall, winter, and spring. And because we're focused on vocabulary and morphology today, this student is a really clear case of how important it is to really focus on vocabulary and morphology, because she started her 7th grade year at that weak performance level. And because her teacher focused on vocabulary and morphology, by the end of the year, she was at that high average performance level. And interestingly, and importantly, this led to higher scores across her sentence processing, reading efficiency, and reading comprehension by the end of the year. So it's really important for us to focus on vocabulary and morphology because of the impact that it has on other sub-skills as well, and reading comprehension. So there's also the final part of the report gives recommendations. So there are recommendations for each of the foundational reading skills that are measured by Read Basics. And the way that these were designed is we culled together evidence-based practices, and then we created a scope and sequence for each of the foundational skills. And we looked across the performance levels and made a strategic plan that leads from one performance level to the next. So if a student's at a weak performance level in sentence processing, we've got recommendations for the weak performance level. And then we'll try to help get students across to low average, then to high average, and then strong. And we've done that for each of the subtests and for the recommendations. Now let's go back to the slideshow.
Yeah, I use Capti with my students. I honestly like these subtests because there's not a lot out there that are really assessing vocabulary and morphology distinctly. So I use it 2 ways. I look at individual students. Are individual students growing? I like to see how how they are against like national norms. Then I also personally look at it like as my whole class. One thing I've made some big changes in how I teach vocabulary and morphology in the last 5 years. And I've noticed as a class, like right now, my average percentile for both subtests is like the 90th percentile. It didn't start at the 90th percentile in the fall. So even on a standardized measure, like you're seeing such growth. So now, okay, how do we, if this is really working, like if you're if you're a literacy specialist or you're a district admin, okay, you see a couple of teachers, the growth is really, really big. How do you now scale that up for your whole building or for your whole district? So I use it for both individual progress, and I look at it, as a class, kind of thinking about my teaching as well.
But I just want to go over the skills that are assessed. So there's the 5 foundational reading skills assessed by Capti Assess, and then basic reading comprehension. You can do these all at once as a battery, or you can do them individually. And that's really helpful if you want to just get a snapshot of how students are doing on one specific skill, or 2, like in this case, if we were to look at vocabulary and morphology, that would take about 19 minutes. And that is testing students on 30 items. So that really helps with the reliability and validity of the assessment, meaning that if students were to take the assessment one time and then take it again, they'll get the same report or the same score, which isn't necessarily common of all assessments, but a really valid and reliable diagnostic is really important for being able to measure success across the school year, and more importantly, offer students the support that they really need in reading. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. All right, and
yeah, here I just wanted to say that the Capti Assess is part of the Capti literacy solution that helps assess, accommodate, and accelerate reading, developed with support from Department of Education, NSF, NIH, and other federal agencies. Let's go next. If you decide to give it a try, you can request a free trial. We simplify implementation by integrating with all of these LMSs, student information systems. Go next. And what's important also is that there's a free basic product training. Usually takes 30 to 90 minutes. You can repeat it multiple times if you need to. It basically covers how to use it. And there's also a paid PD that helps teachers be more effective to explain when to assess, how to assess, who to assess, how to interpret the data, what to do with assessment results. And we're adding intervention components as well. Go next. So, well, this is the contact information if you'd like to do a free trial. There's no obligations. You can do it now. You can do it in the beginning of the school year to give you some ideas of where your students are and where they should be. All right. Thank you very much for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.